Good evening, and thank you for tuning in tonight. I'm New York City Councilman Chaim, and you're listening to Chaim on the radio. We're joined tonight once again by my co-host, Dr. Chaim, who is with us via phone, and we are filling in tonight for Zev Brenner here in 620 on your AM dial, the Talk Line Communications Network. Welcome, Faye.
Hi, Chaim. It is so good to hear your voice again. I missed you so much last week.
Well, you could have listened.
And I am so happy to
could have listened to the radio show last week.
You know what? We had a baby boy.
Mazel tov.
So we've been just drowning and being very, very busy. You know how it is. It takes 10 people to take care of one baby.
Yep.
But we're good. We had our bris, and I'm so excited to be back on the radio show. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
How's the weather upstate?
It is horrific. How's the weather by you?
I'm still waiting for this major storm they were saying earlier that we're going to be getting here in New York City, and I think we had some heavy rain for 5 minutes. They also expected 65 mile per hour winds, and I haven't seen anything yet. But here.
We got all of that. We got crazy winds. Crazy. It was so scary up here, but it's just starting to quiet down now. And I have a major leak going on. Trees came down. My tent came down. So we got hit really, really hard. You're really lucky that you didn't, if you didn't.
Yeah, I was fully prepared. I cleaned my outdoor drains to my house. I secured any loose objects. So I prepared myself. And nothing really came down. Yet. Well, it doesn't look like too much is going to be coming down anytime soon. But we're also competing tonight with the RNC, with the Republican National Convention. It's they're going to be expected the president to speak at 10 p.m. And so I think we're going to be taking away some listeners from the RNC. What do you think?
I think we might be taking away some listeners. Wow, he's actually speaking at exactly 10 p.m., huh?
Yep. So, we have several important topics that we will be discussing tonight on the show, and we're going to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we'll be joined with Oren Barzilay, the president of the union representing 3,700 EMTs and paramedics. And we're also going to be hearing from Juby Shapiro. So if you have any questions about the upcoming school year, if you have any issues with special ed, definitely call into the show. You can ask Juby Shapiro those questions, and she'll answer them. The call-in number here in the studio is 718-303-9090, 718-303-9090. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back.
TCN, Talk Line Network Radio, America's #1 Jewish program.
Welcome back, and you're listening to Chaim on the radio. You're listening to 620 on the AM dial, Talk Line Communications Network, and I'm filling in with my co-host, Dr. Chaim, for Zev Brenner. It's only been a few months since the sounds of sirens echoed through our streets as thousands of New Yorkers were hospitalized due to COVID. The ambulances that carry these patients to medical treatment were staffed by the heroic men and women of the city's emergency medical services, and it's so sad how quickly their service and dedication is forgotten by our New York City leader, Mayor de Blasio. We are joined now by Oren Barzilay, the president of Local 2507, and he is the head of the union that represents 3,700 New York City paramedics and EMTs. And just last week, news broke that Mayor de Blasio has plans to cut 10% of the EMS workforce in an effort to fill a major budget deficit. And in total, the mayor has announced that if state and federal aid isn't offered, he may be forced to lay off 22,000 municipal workers this fall, including among those proposed layoffs are nearly 400 EMS workers. Oren has been a strong voice on behalf of his union members, reminding the mayor and City Hall of the danger of firing these essential workers. And thank you, Oren, for your service to our city, and welcome here live on the air.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure having you. And Oren, let's talk about how the mayor's plans on cutting 400 EMS workers, and how would this affect your workforce?
So, even before the pandemic started, we were short-staffed as is. The city likes to brag about response times, how great they are in our city, but they only report good response times on priority one assignments. They don't really talk about the other low acuity calls, low priority calls that sometimes can take 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and if it's really busy, sometimes you can wait an hour or two to get an ambulance. So, if we're already short a few hundred members, and now you're going to take an additional few hundred members, potentially 400, people will die. I mean, I've been saying it for the past few days. The reality of it is every second counts when it comes to medical services. We know that clinical death begins within 4 to 6 minutes. Then biological death kicks in. You get if you stop breathing or you're having a stroke or a heart attack, we're not there within the first 10 minutes. It's irreversible damage, brain damage, and ultimately death. So the ones who are going to be hurting is the public. The public is going to see a decrease in services that they are so rightfully deserve and they've been accustomed to. We're with metropolis city in the country, and we've had such great service for our city, and the decline in services in the city is just it's unacceptable.
And how backwards is the city? We have many essential services that we need to make sure, even during this $9 billion budget deficit. And, I sit in the BNT, in the budget negotiation team, where I fight on the budget on things that I feel that are important and what's common sense. And there are some things, I voted against the budget this past year. And I think that, New York City needs to take another look at the budget, because a lot of services that were funded are not really essential services. And there was millions of dollars that went into some initiatives and services that members of the city council were lobbying because they chaired those committees and it was important to them. But at the end of the day, it's not important to bring in and fund millions of dollars in services when we are talking about taking away, essential workers, essential services that we need. For example, parks department, people are complaining that our parks are filthy, the weeds are overgrown. People are complaining that the sanitation services, the city council has, and the mayor has taken out over $100 million out of sanitation. And people are complaining that the streets are not clean, and rightfully so. We also spoke about, and the city council, majority of my colleagues voted to defund the NYPD this past budget. But to me, it looks like it's not only defunding the NYPD, we're defunding the EMS workers. And this is exactly what's going on, and people are not talking about it, and that's why it's important to have you on. We just had a hearing not too long ago with EMS workers, and we were saying what a great job they do, and they deserve a raise. People forgot that during Hurricane Sandy, when these huge buildings, these high-rise buildings had no electric and people called 911, what did you guys do? You had to walk with a stretcher up sometimes 20 flights of stairs, right? And now, and during COVID, you were constantly in contact with patients who were tested positive for COVID. You put your lives at risk, responding to these calls, and you also respond to emotional disturbed persons when you don't even have a weapon, and you just have to walk out of your ambulance and try to get that emotional disturbed person either into the ambulance or wait for the cops to respond. There's so much going on that people don't talk about. We have a volunteer ambulance, fortunately, Hatzalah, who does a phenomenal job. And, Mayor de Blasio has to look at, the private volunteer ambulance. And Dr. Fay, you could tell me, because your husband was a Hatzalah member.
Yeah, I'm really moved by this conversation because it really seriously pains me. Because these EMS workers, they go out in all kinds of weather. They go everywhere. They go to places with people that are emotionally disturbed, and they deal with it. You know, and it really does affect them. Like my husband he was a Hatzalah volunteer, and every call that he went on really had a very serious effect on him. And when he was down by 9/11 also. So I think it's terrible to take these people and not to let them realize how important they are to us. We need them so badly. They're really the most important people in this whole city. 9/11, they were there. They took care of us. They saved so many people. And it just breaks my heart to think that not only are we not spending a whole day celebrating how amazing they are, but that the mayor is actually saying that he doesn't want to give them their regular salaries. He wants to cut out some of their jobs. It's just terrible. I'm devastated. It's very personal to me, especially because my husband was a volunteer.
You know, if we get a second wave, God forbid, of COVID after these layoffs, I mean, Oren, like, how would that affect and losing all those EMS workers to respond to such calls?
So during the peak of the event that we went through with COVID, if to listen to an EMS radio frequency, you would hear every other call that goes out was somebody having problem breathing, COVID related. You would hear cardiac arrest coming over. No, it wasn't normal for us to hear more than 40 to 60 times a day that somebody stopped breathing. During COVID, we heard 400 to 600 calls of people just not breathing. So, if they decide to cut and slash our budget to 400 members, we're going to be responding to these homes to just pick up the bodies because it's going to be too late by the time we get there. We're not going to get there in time. That gives us the opportunity to resuscitate them. We're going to people will literally die, and it's unfortunate that in this day and age, what has become of New York City.
So, Oren, how can our listeners help, and should they contact the elected officials to express support for our EMS workers? Where you're up to now with the budget cuts and with your talks with the administration?
So yes, it'd be critical of the public to call their local officials, call 311, demand that the mayor keeps his hands off essential workers, such as police, fire, and EMS. I just want to touch back on something you mentioned earlier during the pandemic. You know, we were the only one, the EMS was the only one that was allowed to go into residence. Every other first responder was told to stand down. EMS is the only one that's going to go in, and we were the last one to come out because nobody wanted to be exposed. Nobody wanted to risk more first responders. And this is the gratitude we get now by laying us off.
And even during COVID, is it true? I mean, this is what the talks were, that during COVID, you had so many calls, EMS workers, EMS received so many calls that there was a whole controversy issue about if someone is not breathing, don't take that person to the hospital because the person's anyhow going to die. So we need to save more lives. And at that time, right, you were already short-staffed. And that was horrific. Of what the administration was telling EMS workers to do, that if someone is not breathing and likely, then there's nothing you can do because the hospital's already overflowing, and so tell me if you know anything about that, and if there's anything you want to discuss about that issue, because I have seen that you were so short-handed during COVID that you couldn't even, EMS workers couldn't even keep up with the caseload.
Right. So, when the pandemic hit, our streets became like a war zone for EMS. Phase one was to start resuscitating them and bring them to the hospital. Phase two was, after 20 minutes of resuscitation, if they don't come back, you are to pronounce them dead. Then the final phase that came in is you come in, if they're not breathing, do not attempt. That's when our local raised the alarm and said, no, that's unacceptable. People need to be given a chance to live. You know, there's ways we can save them, you know, and the state redacted the policy over us not resuscitating because it made such big headlines when we sounded the alarms, and it created basically an hysteria among the state. And I'm very honored that I was the one who raised the alarm to give people a second chance at life.
Wow, so important. And people were saying how the state also killed thousands of people, sending them to the nursing homes, blaming the governor of sending COVID patients into nursing homes, and that just spread the virus throughout the nursing homes. They were forced to go in. And, kudos to you, kudos to your advocacy on behalf of all New Yorkers. And, so, Oren, thank you so much for joining us here today, and I'm urging our listeners to please contact your elected officials and let them know that you don't want to see 400 EMS workers being laid off, and we need to make sure that we keep essential workers here in New York City, especially at a time when we're seeing a slight uptick of COVID. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. EMS workers, they do a phenomenal life-saving job. So thank you, Oren, once again for your service on behalf of the city. Any last words you want to tell our listeners?
Our men and women are dedicated. They're here to provide a essential service. We are truly there to bring you back. When people stop breathing, we bring them back to life. And where do you put the price on that? That there's no price value to that. So please call your local officials and tell them how important and vital this service is to your community.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to tell our listeners again that, seeing things from the inside, many of my constituents who live in southern Brooklyn don't really see firsthand what goes on in other parts of the city, of what's happening inside City Hall, of what's happening, how backwards, our city is going. And you read about it, you see it in the media, you read about it in the news. But let me tell you guys and girls out there, you need to raise your voice. If you have social media, use it. If you see an elected official that says something that you agree with, retweet it, quote tweet it. If you don't have Twitter, you don't have Facebook, you don't have Instagram, and all other types of social media, start signing up and get on social media. Because, people always say that, we are a minority in the community, that, when we see things that are common sense, we're only a minority. And that's not true. The majority of New Yorkers want to see EMS workers out in the street. They don't want to see layoffs. The majority of New York City residents are there to support our public safety. There is a majority, but the majority needs to speak out. And if we don't speak out today, then we don't know what our future holds for us. So start getting out there, start tweeting at the mayor, start tweeting at any elected officials that represent you. Say, save our EMS workers. Because if we don't do that, we're going to see 400 less EMS workers out there in the street. So thank you, Oren, for joining us once again. And
thank you so much.
Thank
you, and thank you for being a big supporter of ours as well. I really appreciate that.
Always. In City Hall we don't have too many supporters when it comes to EMS workers and the NYPD. But again, we need to raise your voice. We need people like you, Oren, union leaders who step up and don't give up. So thank you all so much. So we're going to take. Thank you. Good night. We're going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Juby Shapiro, an advocate for students with special education needs. So please, if you have any questions, our call-in number here at the station is 718-303-9090.
KCN Talk Line Network Radio, America's #1 Jewish program.
Welcome back, and you're listening to Chaim the Radio, 620 on the AM dial. Welcome, Fagi. Welcome back. So today, I don't know if I told you, but I partnered with my colleagues in government, Councilman Kalman Yeager, Assemblyman Simcha Eichenstein, and State Senator Simcha Felder, to send a letter to the New York City School Chancellor, Richard Carranza, regarding the plight of special education students here in our city. During the COVID outbreak and shutdown, parents of special education students reported significant regression in the children's development and behavior. And distance learning had a severely detrimental effect on all students. And for those who require one-on-one direct services, it has been devastating. And as many schools opt to offer a partial or fully virtual learning experience in the upcoming school year, it is critical that the DOE permits one-on-one learning to take place within the home as well as in the classroom. And additionally, we have heard feedback from hundreds of special ed providers who have not been paid for the hours they worked during the pandemic. And in some cases, they're owed tens of thousands of dollars. And it's been 6 months without a dime in sight. And Juby Shapiro is an advocate for students with special education needs, and she is the founder and president of Tafkid, an organization devoted to advocacy on behalf of the special ed community. Juby has worked with us to prepare this letter, and she is raising the alarm within the community about the situation that these students and providers are in. And thank you for joining us, Juby.
To be back with you.
Thank you so much, and I want to urge our listeners, if you have any questions for Juby, our number here in the studio is 718-303-9090.
Juby, I'm actually on a personal note, I'm really excited to be on the program with you.
Thank
you. I have a special needs grandson, and we're very affected by what happened by COVID. He just has really regressed so much from where he was up to. So I'm so excited to hear what you have to say. And my daughter's actually on the line also listening.
Oh, I'm so happy. And if your daughter needs any help after the show, she's welcome to call me personally. I'm happy to be of help to whoever needs. We really try to help whoever calls us.
Thank you so much.
I can tell you my own background is I'm a special education advocate for approximately 25 years, and my two oldest children, who are turning 30 and 28, are multiply handicapped and live at home with us. And I can tell you that parenting children during COVID-19 was challenging, but parenting special children is especially challenging. And a lot of our parents are reporting tremendous regression, loss of skills, deterioration in children's behavior for parents of children, for example, who have emotional disturbance, autism, but in general, just tremendous regression. I can also tell you that my children are older already. They're out of the special ed system, and they go to a day hab, and of course the day hab closed because of COVID. But I was so fortunate that the day hab allowed direct personnel into my home, and they sent 2 people every day. Plus, my other services, my Medicaid home attendants and my ComHab workers were also able to come. And it was a very, very scary situation because myself and my husband and my 2 younger children actually got COVID-19 in March.
Right.
And my 2 older kids are multiply handicapped, so they're in a risk category. Thank God for these workers who came into my house every single day. But for them, my older children would have for sure gotten it. I was able to effectively distance myself safely from my older children for the better part of a month so that my kids could be safe while I healed. But it's that bravery of these providers who would come into the house to work with the kids. And I know many other teachers, paras, therapists are willing to come into children's homes and work with them one-on-one, even if they have to wear a mask and gloves and try their best to be safe. But it's definitely necessary for some of these children to receive individual services.
Juby, tell our listeners about how special ed students rode out during the pandemic And did they have the virtual services? And also, let's talk about what you're hearing from providers about the lack of back pay. Because, these providers, they're providing all the services for our children, special needs. And if they don't get paid, right, then they can't do their job, right? So let's talk about these two things. And let's talk about first, about how you rode out the pandemic.
So in general, myself personally, we did the best we could, but I was fortunate that I did have dedicated staff who came into the house and worked with my kids. I don't know what I would have done without them. In fact, 2 of my staff members were saying one day that they think my two older children are 2 angels, because out of the 6 people who come into my house to work with them on a weekly basis, thank God not one of them got COVID-19. So as far as input from other families, it's just been devastating. Children with special needs, especially severe special needs, really cannot distance learn effectively. And the special ed schools really try their best. And they try to do virtual therapy. The parents were engaged. The parents became the children's therapists, which is very difficult because that meant the parents couldn't work, couldn't do other things around the house while their kids were in session. The parents of other children who are on Zoom and other distance learning programs. Everyone did the best they could, but the feedback that I'm getting from the parents that I work with, the families I work with, is that the children suffered terribly. There was tremendous regression. I have one parent who told me that her son, who has a lot of behavioral issues, the behavior regressed to the point where this little 8-year-old boy is chasing his mother around the house with a knife this summer. It is really frightening. And there are autistic children who actually lost language that they had developed. Kids lost skills, and I can't even tell you the toll that is taken on the multiply handicapped students who really require physical therapy and occupational therapy, speech therapy, oral motor therapy, where the speech therapist has to actually put their hands in the child's mouth to help them to increase the tone in their mouth. Feeding therapy. How can you do feeding therapy through distance learning? It's not possible. And I will tell you, throughout the pandemic, many of these providers were willing to come into people's homes, but were blocked by the city from doing so. Also, even now, when one-on-one services are permitted to some extent, there's really no directives coming from the DOE. I had one parent call me the other day. The child is very severely behavioral, has severe attention deficit disorder, and she's supposed to be getting a para. And she found out that her school is going to be distance learning half the time and in school the other half. And she was just told that her para can't come to the house. So this mother's in the military. She says to me, how in the world is my child going to focus on any lessons while she's home this year with no para sitting with her? I can't sit with her. I have to work. So this is a really serious situation. It's affecting really thousands of children in New York City, and my heart goes out to all these families who are trying to navigate the situation the best they can.
And, schools are opening, right? So there was a way to do this in a safe way, to have a one-on-one, correct?
There are ways to do safely, and you have to be creative. A lot of the special ed private schools have found ways that they are reopening, and they've ramped up safety measures. They've really made cohorts where the children are not coming into contact with a lot of other kids. That's not so difficult to do when you have small classes where there's perhaps 6 children in a class with a number of staff, especially these ABA type of schools where the kids are set up in different stations. Really not so difficult to make this a safe, hygienic place. These programs in general were safe and hygienic to begin with, because safety is number one when you're dealing with children with these type of issues, because in an instant the child can bolt out of the school or grab something. So they're always hypervigilant in these schools. So it's understandable in the New York City public schools it's a larger model, but I still don't understand why the public schools could not make separate cohorts for the more severely affected children who are in smaller classes and find a way for those children to attend school every day.
So what is your communication on a daily basis with the Department of Education?
I do impartial hearings against the Department of Education. I represent parents at the hearings to try to get services for the children. I speak to many districts on a daily basis. I speak to impartial hearing officers, and I speak to a lot of parents. But basically, we've been asking the same questions since the beginning of the pandemic as to direct services with special needs children, and we are not getting any concrete answers. And some of the answers are actually really conflicting, and providers are honestly fearful to start servicing children because they believe that they're not going to get paid.
Yeah, and these are people that know Juby Shapiro, right? And they know that you advocate for them. But what happens, and you're having such a difficult time, on your own, right? But you're a fighter. You're always fighting. Now, what happens to those parents who don't know a Juby Shapiro? I mean, how many children are just slipping through the cracks?
I think parents are very confused. I think a lot of children are slipping through the cracks. I don't even know how many people realize how their children will be slipping through the cracks if their children attend public schools, because the schools have really not been so forthcoming. I have a parent who contacted my office this week. She says she was given a public school placement for her multiply handicapped child. She contacted the placement. She wanted to know more about what types of services the placement could offer her child. They gave her a virtual tour. Everything sounded great. At the end of the virtual tour, and they're telling her about their therapy rooms and all the services that they can give the child. At the end of the tour, they said to the parent, you know what, you have to go on our website and you get to select a box. You check out which box you want. You can either opt that your child will virtually learn on the computer all year and not go to school, or you can have your child attend school 1 week on, 1 week off. And the parent called me completely confused. She says, how is my child going to benefit from that? Also, how are they going to receive therapy on their off weeks? The whole thing doesn't make any sense. And with children with special needs, consistency is so important to their success.
Yeah, so, it's just mind-boggling, and the things you're saying and the things that we've been speaking throughout the year about different issues, and I organized a offline hearing with Department of Education with all the advocates, and then COVID hit, and we were going to hold the chancellor accountable for all these issues that are happening now with special needs. And it came to a point that when I organized this offline hearing, the chancellor called me into his office, and I had a one-on-one meeting with him. And he assured me, he said, no, we're going to make sure, let's say, the providers are going to get paid, things are going to run smoother. And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and about a month later, and we haven't heard anything since. So it's understandable that during the beginning of COVID, how things could move slow, but things have always been moving slow.
That's correct.
Yeah, so, tell listeners what happened when I came down to...
I was going to bring that up,
Go
actually.
Ahead.
So I actually invited Councilman Deutsch down to see what was going on at 131 Livingston Street, the Department of Education, where we do the impartial hearings. Right now, of course, due to COVID, everything is virtual. We're all by phone. But back then, we were in person at 131 Livingston. And I found that when the councilman came, they were completely shocked, and they kind of put us in a separate room. They didn't want him walking around the floor. They were very apprehensive, and I tried to explain to them that he's really here as a friend. He's not here against the DOE. We're trying to fix the system. We're trying to help people, and the goal is to really help children. I think that's everyone's goal, is to help children. No one wants to harm children, but there are problems with the system, and Councilman Deutsch really worked hard to try to understand and get into the trenches and see what the problems were. And he didn't just speak to advocates like myself. The councilman, when he went down to the Livingston Street, actually spoke with district representatives, with hearing officers, with personnel at the hearing office, and really got an understanding from all perspectives as to where the problems lie in the system. And this is before COVID-19. I have to tell you, before COVID-19, we were having problems getting providers paid. Even when a hearing officer ordered that they get paid, there were delays. After COVID-19, we are having a total disaster. We have providers who have not been paid the entire school year, and we have no providers who got paid between March and June from the 2019-2020 school year. And that is terrifying. You have judges who order, pay the provider, X amount. We won the hearing, but we lost the war because this person didn't get paid. A provider called me 2 days ago crying to me on the phone. She cannot pay her bills. She's gone into debt. She hasn't been paid for the student. She can't take him back next year unless she knows she's going to get payment. And people ask me, how long will it take? And I have no idea. And I have to tell you, providers send in billing to the implementation unit, and they get crazy answers back like, you're authorized. What does that mean? Does that mean I'm getting paid? That does not mean you're getting paid. One of my schools that I work with actually was told, don't you have an accountant? And then when she nudged, asked again, and she's not nudging, but she's owed millions of dollars on cases that we won. She was told, you can only bother me about 3 cases a day.
Wow.
And these are the types of responses, and the reason, part of the problem is that nobody's really giving us honest answers.
Yeah, Juby, the phones are ringing.
I actually have another question from my daughter, if I can. Do you mind, Councilman?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my daughter is saying that another very big issue is the transportation, getting back and forth. There's no transportation at this point.
Right. And again, this is another area where the DOE school is about to start, and the DOE has not come forward and told us whether or not children with special needs have transportation, even if their schools are open. I was just discussing this with one of the schools where I represent a lot of the kids. We're very confused, and I told the school perhaps look into private transportation, and we can go and seek an impartial hearing to try to get the money back for it.
I'm very glad, Dr. Fay, you brought up that point, because that is a very important point about the transportation. DOE is like really behind and in knowing exactly what needs to be done. And it's not just now during COVID. It was all along. They're kind of confused. But let's take some calls. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi, I have a question for Juby. How are you?
Okay, good. How are you?
I'm just curious. You said that providers have not been paid in quite a while, even before COVID hit. Do you think it's going to come to a point where providers just plain and simply can no longer go on, can no longer work, can no longer service our special needs children?
Yeah.
Just continue?
Unfortunately, I hate to say this, but these providers are dedicated. They really are. People go into this field because they care about kids. They want to see the kids get services, but there's a practical reality. Their family has to eat. They have to pay their bills. They need a roof over their heads. And they've been so abused by the system, by this process, and, I am at a loss of what to tell them as far as when they'll get paid. And unfortunately, a lot of the providers are now telling the parents that they need to be just privately paid. They can't deal with the DOE anymore. And that puts a tremendous burden on the parents.
Right, of course. This is, something that not all parents can do monetarily. Is there a way that you believe we can hold DOE accountable for, not paying our providers?
I think first we have to get to the bottom of why the providers haven't been paid. The first excuse was, we want to see distance learning plans. Well, first of all, the public schools were just doing distance learning, and they didn't have to put together elaborate distance learning plans, but somehow all the private schools and the special ed providers did. None of them were given any feedback as to whether their plan was approved or not, but in good faith they kept on working with the kids. And we have no idea if the DOE is going to come back and find some issue with the plan and then just use that as an excuse not to pay. And that's something that I'm really worried about. And I don't know when this is going to end, but my question is, why are they not paying? Is it something with the city running out of money? Is it something having to do with the fact that there's only 6 people implementing 10,000 orders? We're not quite sure.
Right. I think if you take a look at the budget that was allocated for the coming school year, you'll see that DOE definitely received a large sum. So, this is completely unacceptable, and I think it's time that we force DOE to do something about this and hold them accountable.
Well,
thank you so much, and you should maybe one day run for office, so thank you for those questions.
Maybe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Wow, the phones are ringing, but, let's take a quick commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll give our, your message to our listeners. So we'll take a commercial break, and we'll be right back.
KCN Talk Line Network Radio, America's #1 Jewish program.
Welcome back, and you're listening to Chaim the Radio, and I'm here live in the studio and live in the air with my co-host, Dr. Fay Zakheim. We are speaking with Juby Shapiro, the president and founder of Tafkid, an organization devoted for advocacy on behalf of the special needs in our community. And Juby, I just want to say that you are a lifesaver. And you continue to be a lifesaver to thousands upon thousands of parents of special needs. So tell our listeners, for the last minute and a half we have left, how can our listeners contact you at Tafkid if they need guidance?
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for everything that you do, Councilman Deutsch, for on behalf of special needs children in the community. The main thing, first of all, parents should realize is you do have rights. and you can go to a hearing against the Department of Education. I remember during the school bus strike a number of years ago, I did hearings. I was one of the only people doing hearings against the DOE because of the bus strike, and I was getting private transportation for students. So it's an unusual time, but we can bring unusual types of cases to make sure that children get the services that they need. Definitely stand up and advocate. Don't just sit back and watch your child regress. Your child is entitled under the law, federal law, to a free, appropriate public education, and they need to get the necessary supports and services. And we're, in an unusual position with the pandemic, but we still have rights for our children. If you need to reach me, I can be reached at 718-252-2236. I can also be reached via email at tafkid, that's TAFKID, at AOL.com. And I'm happy to answer anyone's questions, and I'm here to try to help children.
Thank you so much. And just if you want to repeat the number.
Sure. Thank you. 718-252-2236 is our phone number, and our email address is TAFKID at AOL.com. That's tafkid at AOL.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juby, and once again, thank you for everything that you do and the advocacy throughout the year. And speaking about rights, people should stand up for the rights. I just want to say that all the things that are happening here in New York City with the defunding the NYPD and crime going up and shootings and everything that's going on, remember, and I'm going to say this again, I'm going to say this every week, wake up, New Yorkers, wake up. If you believe in public safety, if you believe in police reform, yes, and everyone agrees that we need police reform, you need to wake up and stand up for yourself, stand up for your rights. Don't sit back and feel that your elected officials are going to advocate for you and protect you, because they are not. They are not. And if you don't stand up and for those elected officials that fight for your causes, you need to back them up, and you need to go on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, and putting great comments in any type of articles that you feel that you are agreeable or disagreeable with your elected official. Hold them accountable for their actions. Remember, I have raised this alarm for the last several years, and before that, when it came to anti-Semitic hate crimes, people just don't listen. They're waiting for their elected officials, or they gave up on their elected officials. Wake up, New York, and stand up, speak out. And until next week, I want to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, and I want to give a Mazel Tov to, and I just tweeted out, so if you look at my Twitter, you're going to see a very special Mazel Tov to Mari Stoudemire on his conversion to Judaism. And I was honored to meet him in Israel on my mission to Israel with JCRC.